Hey, and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to build an outfeed table for my Dewalt job site table saw. This build is going to cost about $350 and is primarily made out of construction grade lumber with an MDF top. Let's get started. First, we're going to start by breaking down our lumber. During this build, I'm using 2x10 material. The reason that I'm using 2x10 as opposed to 2x4 is because it's going to have a much better grain direction, going to have fewer knots, and overall the boards tend to be straighter. Also, we're going to be able to control the width of our boards a little bit better, and in this case we're going to be having both our legs and our stretcher pieces be 4 inches wide. As you can see, we set the table saw height just over the board for safety. We're checking for square because as we keep this thing nice and square throughout the whole process, our final build will be more square and our glue ups will be a lot better as well. Now, as we're breaking these down, the other advantage of using 2x10 materials is that you get a very sharp clean edge on both sides. And here we start breaking down our stretchers. Once again, these are 4 inches as well. And the final length on these stretchers will be 95 1/2 inches. And there you can see why I'm building myself an outfeed table. So we're going to be squaring up each edge of our legs and our stretchers. That's just going to help A, be cleaner, and B, just be more level, especially on our legs. And it'll help with our glue ups, even though it will be end grain, but still, we got to put some glue on there. Now we're going to be taking care of all of our sanding. It's just a lot easier to get all the sides before it's all assembled. We're just using 120 grit sandpaper. We're knocking down the edges as we go as well, because while we do have those nice clean edges, the corners can be a little sharp. Now the layout's going to be the next step here. The total width is going to be 48 by 8 feet. My problem is I work in a basement shop and I want to be able to get this out of there at some point. And the smallest door that I have on the way out is a 32-inch door. So I'm going to be making this in essentially 2 different sections, and you're going to see where it's split right in the middle. And that middle is going to be determined based on the size of the table saw as well. So that's going to be all part of this layout. So we're just going to do a little bit of a dry layout. Again, you can see my corners going in. My corner legs, and then here I am measuring for 31 inches to make sure that it matches and goes through all of my doors. I forgot to make a couple of the legs for the interior section, so I went in and did that. Each of our sections will have 4 legs. Now I'm taking my legs and just doing a quick layout, just marking for height, and then I'm marking for center, because when I go and do my layout, I'm going to mark the center of where each board needs to land so that my legs are falling in the right sections, and it's just going to make the whole process a lot smoother and have a little less stressful glue up. Now I'm doing my final dry layout. I'm finding center between those 2 boards. Next, you can see how the end is going to be attached. I do have my stretchers up 1/4 inch just so it helps get a little bit more level. And I have the stretcher back set 1/4 inch because I'm going to take a piece of plywood and cover up all of the fasteners. Now you can see just the general layout. We have a total of 4 legs in the middle, this end on both sides. And next we're going to start doing the actual glue up. But before that, I went in and I made that cut to create those 2 pieces. Again, the piece that I'm currently touching, that section is going to be 31 inches wide, so it can make its way through my 32-inch door at the top of my stairs. Now it's time to start the glue up. We're going to be using Tight Bond 1 during this whole glue up, as well as some 2.5-inch screws. We're going to be making sure that we're getting good glue squeeze out on these legs because they are going to be carrying the majority of the weight. And we're going to pre-drill, especially on the ends, because we don't want those boards to be splitting. So again, we're just gluing and screwing, and we're going to be checking for square as well, because even though this is a piece of shop furniture, we want it to be nice and straight and flat. Now I noticed I was making a huge mess with all that glue squeeze out, so I went and got some plastic drop cloth to help make everything be a little bit cleaner. Again, we went to the other side and we started the same process. We've got our stretchers up, that 1/4 inch little shim that I've got there. We're putting plenty of glue on there and we're gluing and screwing. Here again, we're just lining up to those marks that we did already to help with our quick layout, making sure that it's square, gluing and screwing each of our legs. And here's a little bit better up close view of why we did all that work on the front end. But once more, we're making sure that it is nice and square. We're clamping it down. And since we're in the middle, it's not quite as important that we pre-drill. So we just sunk 2 screws in there. Next, we're going to be moving to the short end I bought these 90-degree little clamp things. I don't know what you call them, but I'll tell you what, just spend the $10-15 and get yourself a set. It just makes these glue ups on ends, these 90-degree corners, a lot easier. You just use 2 clamps that you already got. It helps to keep everything nice and lined and just keep it rigid as well. Same process as before. We're gluing and screwing, making sure to pre-drill on all of our ends, because once again it is end grain, and as you can see, we're sending screws through both sides of the stretcher and then also through the leg, because we want to make sure we've got plenty of strength. And here we're going in to that centerpiece that we went in and cut already. We're putting glue on that end grain. Glue to end grain doesn't do quite as good of a job as when you go long grain to long grain, but it can't hurt. So again, we're just going in, making sure that we're nice at 90 degrees. Oh, now you get my hat. But we're pre-drilling and then sending those screws in there. And then that reason that we have that extra 1/4 inch, if you recall from earlier, is to cover up those fasteners. Now we're just going to the other side, doing the exact same process. We've got those shims in there to make sure that we're staying off the ground just a little bit to help keep the table level. You only want the legs to be down, or else it's going to be a nightmare to keep level. Just clamping it in, making sure that we're nice and square, nice and tight, pre-drilled, and then sending those screws again, and we're almost done. Now, as you can see, we're making sure that those pieces are level. Something happened in my screwing that didn't go quite as well as I wanted, but that's just how this goes. So next we're doing that shorter piece, and we're putting in that leg, that center leg, that is not part of the large section, it's part of the smaller section. So we're just going in again, gluing and screwing, sending our screws in, making sure that we're staying nice and square. And then we're connecting our other long brace in the middle to that leg. Glue is going to be very important because this leg is also going to be carrying quite a bit of the load. So we want to make sure that not just the screws are holding it. And then we go on the other side, doing the same exact process as before, pre-drilling because we're going into some of the end grains. We don't want to split, doing plenty of glue, and connecting to that center leg. Now we're going to start laying out the other side of the exterior. Now the easiest way that I wanted to do this was just copy the exact one that we did first. So we just took the legs, I clamped them to the other side, then I took the stretcher, once again, just connected it, gluing and screwing and going down. This is going to be a lot easier than trying to measure everything. No need to remeasure twice if you can just copy it. So that's the process that I went through here. Way quicker than doing it the other way. And here we go, just putting it in the other side, and boom, we're done. So now we need to start laying out the rest of our table. And unfortunately, I ran out of some of those corner clamps, so when I went and attached the far side of my stretcher pieces, I didn't have the luxury, but it's okay. We went in, glued, screwed again, kept checking to make sure that it was nice and square. We're connecting both the stretcher to the leg on both sides, and we go to the other side and repeat that process. The next part of the build is going to be putting that second stretcher, which is going to hold our table saw. So first I grabbed a level to get an accurate height, and then I went to each of our legs and I marked where that second stretcher is going to go. Now I will have a 3/4 inch top as well as a 3/4 inch base that the table saw is going to sit on. So it's not a big deal to keep that in mind, but if you are going to change it up in some way, maybe double up the top, you want to make sure that you're keeping track of that when you're setting the height. Now I'm going in and I'm cutting our stretchers. The front stretcher that I'm using is only 1.5 inches thick. The reason I'm doing that is to give me a little bit more room. It's plenty strong, but you can certainly use a full 4 inches. Here I'm just setting back that stretcher because I'm going to have a stretcher that'll go the opposite way to give additional support. And here I've got my middle stretcher that is a full 4 inches. There's that side stretcher that I was talking about. And here I'm putting in that 3/4 inch plywood where we're going to put the table saw down just to check some initial heights. As you can see, I am hitting that center leg, but we haven't attached that yet, so that's not a big deal. Now again, it's the same process as before, going in and gluing and screwing, making sure to pre-drill each of our holes on that stretcher. Because it is 1.5 inches, it is a little bit more susceptible for cracking. So just make sure that you are pre-drilling, especially there on those ends. Now we're going in the middle, and that center stretcher that we were initially hitting with our fence, I took a 1, 2, 3 block and I set it back 2 inches. So what I did is I took that level and I lined it up with our 2 outside legs and then used that same block to set it back. And then in that last middle stretcher, I used again our level to get it all straightened up, and it's nice and equal. It is screwed on both sides, just again for additional strength and rigidity. Now we're going to put in that stretcher for the middle. Again, it's a 4-inch board as opposed to 1.5 inches, just because of that additional strength that I really wanted. Again, glued, screwed, putting plenty of glue on that. And then on that far side, again, I went with a 4-inch. I probably should have done 1.5 inches, but it is what it is. Here you can see that front stretcher piece. I attached it, pre-drilled everything, and cut out a slot. Now we're starting to work on our top. So this is the more complicated side. We did have to notch out for that leg in the center. It is back set 1.5 inches, but as you can see, we got a nice fit. Here I'm going in and starting just to lay out the base. I did everything centered just because that's where most of that weight's going to be, in the center of those bays. And now I'm just starting to cut the pieces for the top. So the top, I just did 3-inch wide pieces. I didn't think that we needed 4, and it just helped with some of concealing of the top. There were some pieces where I had to go in and notch out for the way that we laid out, especially when we had to offset that one leg. And here you can see just doing some dry fitting. Once again, just checking everything and then getting the pocket hole jig out and pocket holing as much as we can. Where we are doing the notch, we're putting a pocket hole on that long side. I wish there was a way that I could effectively put one in that short side, because it would have been nice to get that attached, but not a big deal. Now just going in and attaching those bottom braces. Do notice that there's no glue. This is just because I didn't think it was needed. There's plenty of strength with those stretcher pieces, and we're going to be using a 1/2-inch plywood on it. The other pieces are just going to be there to help prevent some sagging, but it is helpful. And again, we're putting those on that second piece. Now we're starting to put our top together, again, kind of pounding in for that notch, just using pocket holes once again, because I do want to be able to take this apart. This next section, we needed to spread it out just a touch. Again, just attaching with pocket holes and pocket screws. And we're just going to continue that process through the whole top. Here we're doing a little bit of a different screw technique there, just because we couldn't get that pocket hole in. But the whole top, other than that, is attached with pocket holes. We do have some shims throughout there. Some of my cuts were off. Again, it's shop furniture, but we still want it to be pretty good. So don't be afraid if you make a couple errors. No big deal at all. And now we've got our top all attached with our pocket holes. And now we're going to be checking for square. Now again, checking for square, you just go corner to corner. You take 2 measurements. You see how far you're off. In this, I was off 1/8 of an inch, which I'll take. And actually, if you look down that front face, you can see a slight bend. That is definitely where that's coming from, but not a big deal at the end of the day. My next step is going in and again sanding all the faces that I'm going to be using a polyurethane on, and just making sure that I get any glue spots or any sharp edges. I also went in and painted my MDF top, the same paint that I used on my floor, which is MDF, just because I thought it looks nice and it'll help just make the room seem a little bit bigger. I then took my router and I used a 1/4 inch roundover bit on the channels where the fence is going to go between on my table saw. This is definitely an unneeded step, and quite frankly, I don't know if I would do it again, because you could see all that burnout, and it took quite a while to sand that out to make it look decent. Next, I'm going around and starting to level out the table. I just took a level, shined a light underneath it so I could see where the high or low spots were, and then I used some playing cards to try to level it out, just sinking some screws into the MDF. You got to remember that MDF does not love screws, so you can find something with a pretty coarse thread. It's going to help it grip. Then I went around again, just did the whole table, leveling. I stopped using the light because the table was not too bad. I'm not going for a perfect level. If I needed that, it'd be a torsion box, but this is perfect for what I need. My next step is going to be cutting the channels for my fence to ride through. I'm lining up with where I have those notches cut in my top rails. I'm using a track saw. If you just use a level and a normal circular saw, you'll be fine. One thing I want to note on this cut is that make sure that you cut the far channel first, because then you have support when you go in. If you don't have support on your track saw, it becomes an unnecessarily difficult cut. I have some blue tape laid out just so I know where to stop my cut. Again, you can see I'm making sure it's square. I went on both sides. And again, making that cut and going to the line on that blue tape, because then I'm going to take my oscillating tool and square it up and just finish those cuts. If I was better with a flush trim saw, I probably would have used that, especially on those bigger pieces, but not a big deal. Now I'm just going to set the final length for the table. Essentially, I'm cutting it flush with my legs on the outside because that inside leg is inset 1.5 inches. And then my final cut to cut out the spot for the table saw, I have to do this cut backwards. So it's not my favorite cut, but again, the reason is that I need that track to be supported by the table itself. If it was the other way, it would bind and it would be an even more unsafe cut. And I'm also making sure that I'm holding that off cut, again, to prevent any binding at the end of the cut. Next, I'm going to start fitting the saw itself. As you can see, the fence is really not moving great. I made that channel way too thin. I went and I added an additional 1/4 inch. If I were to do this again, I'd probably add a full 1/2 inch just to give me some additional room and to be able to add some thicker edge banding. Next, I'm taking that offcut of the top and I'm cutting some strips to use to help double up the edge of my table. Since it's 3/4 inch MDF, it's really not that strong, so I'm going to beef it up to a full 1.5 inches, and I'm making sure that I cut those strips a little bit wider than the overhang of the top because I'm going to take a router and flush trim it. I'm using some Quick and Thick as the glue. It helps eliminate the squeeze out drips quite a bit, and it also sets a lot faster than a normal tight bond, so it was perfect for this application. I made sure that I used a piece of lumber just to keep those clamps from making marks in my tabletop. I did this on the 2 main edges that I can go and actually do some clamping on. Again, just getting some good glue spread on there because that's where all the strength is coming from. Making sure we've got that overhang and some good squeeze out as we go along. I wish I had some more clamps. I did run out here again, but as the old saying goes, you can never have too many clamps. Then I take my flush trim saw, take that extra long piece out. Now I take a patterning bit that's going to run along the top, and I slowly make my way down the full table. I did it on both edges. The next thing that I do is I start working on my edge banding. Since this is a piece of hard maple that I got directly from the lumber store, it does not have a straight edge, so I use my track saw to make one straight edge, which I then use to run through my table saw at 1 1/2 inches. Now that equals the doubled up size of the MDF top on the 2 main edges that we'll be using. I then go over to my miter saw and put a 45-degree cut on one end and 90 degrees on the other. I'm going to be doing a mitered corner on the far end, which you can see here. I'm applying some Quick and Thick, the same glue that we use on the MDF here, to the edge banding. I've also got a scrap piece of that edge banding that's going to be used to help line up that miter. You can see that small piece there. I'm just using that to help again line up that miter cut, and using my blue tape just to hold the edge banding in place while I get everything lined up. Then I'm going to take a clamp once I get it perfectly aligned, and then I'm going to take my 18 gauge brad nailer and just tack it all the way down. Now the brad nails are more for alignment and less for strength. I'm going to come back and put a bunch of clamps on that whole edge band just to get it nice and tight again, so we get plenty of squeeze out, because all of the strength is coming from the glue, not from the nails. Next, we're going through everybody's favorite exercise, which is sanding. Now, this was a little bit extra difficult for me because I had already pre-finished the top. Now, the poly that I had initially applied didn't stick well because I put it on way too thick and I didn't clean the surface well enough. So here I'm coming back with 150 grit sandpaper. I'm hitting the maple and then, of course, the top once again. Now, the biggest thing when you're applying any sort of finish, especially polyurethane, is you need to make sure that you've got an even sanding, but also that the surface is perfectly clean. So here we're using a bunch of mineral spirits to take off all of that dust. Do not use wood on this, especially MDF, because wood is going to be absorbed by MDF and it's going to water pop all of your edges. So it's just one thing to keep in mind while you're doing all of your cleanup. Use mineral spirits. If you've got a mask, wear it. If not, make sure you've got plenty of ventilation. And now I'm just starting to put the polyurethane on. I'm using a semi-gloss on the top and all the sides. I'm doing that just because it'll be a little bit more resistant to any sort of glue that might get on the top. It'll also make it a little bit more durable. And here I'm going and just applying it to all the other edges. I'm just doing one coat on all the sides. Did it mainly to get that nice amber hue coming through and to make it not have that pink that the construction lumber seems to have in our case here. So again, I'm just going around the whole thing, applying it to all the sides that I can see, and even doing it on the far side, which I'll never see. One quick note that I wanted to make is my finished table saw height is 3/16 higher than the table. Just did that to prevent any catching. So here you can see the final product. I went in and I put 1/4 inch plywood on both sides of the table saw. That's just going to help class it up a little bit, and it'll keep the noise and dust down. Just keep it all contained right there. On this panel, you can see that I've got a channel cut for the power and also the dust collection. I'm just using a shop vac in an Oneida dust separator, which is in the next bay. It works great. I've got it plugged in right there. I ran some power in this table. Won't show you how to do it, but pretty much just use some funny pipe, which goes to a junction box, which I have an extension cord that runs and gets plugged into the wall. You can see my current dust setup. It's working great. Really am enjoying it. As we kind of come to the other side, you can see another outlet that I've got there. Got another outlet on the far end, but just put those there just for a little bit of ease of sanding and whatever else that you got to be plugging in. This table has really been working great. Had about 2 weeks under use, and it's really been great. I regret not having it earlier, and this is something I hope you all like. And here you can see that channel for the fence. I edge banded it just to provide some more strength because I'm just worried about the edge with MDF, and that little bit of edge banding will do a lot. Here you can just see the underside of our table and the funny pipe and the way that it's run. I've got 1/2 inch plywood on both shelves. It's plenty strong. That thing's not going anywhere. There's that other outlet, and it's been working great. Been using it for some current builds. Can't wait to fill you in the future. And there again, you can just see that junction box. For $350, I think this is a great build and one that all of you would really like to have in your shop. It takes about a weekend. It's a lot of fun to build, and I hope that you get as much use out of it as I did. Again, thank you for watching my video. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to comment below. If not, we'll see you next time.